Perth, November 1998. The kind of warm spring night that settles over the city like a film. Humid, gentle, restless. You can almost feel the summer waiting behind the horizon. Northbridge pulses with life. The pubs and bars are spilling their final crowds into the streets. Taxi doors thud shut in quick succession, and the glow of neon illuminates patches of pavement like fractured pieces of daylight. If you stand on Brisbane Street long enough, you hear it all. The hum of passing cars, the clatter from late-night kitchens, the distant laugh of someone on their way home, the soundtrack of a city winding down. And somewhere in that haze, 19-year-old Lisa Jane Brown is walking alone. A petite figure with tired eyes, her hair tied back, dressed simply. A young woman with two small children waiting for her at home in Maylands. A young woman who, in this moment, seems so ordinary, so easy to overlook. Just another person navigating the neon shadows. At around 12:30 a.m. on the 10th of November, a witness sees her walking west on Brisbane Street, turning towards Lake Street. It's a simple movement, one foot in front of the other, but it will become the final confirmed sighting of her alive. And by the time the sun rises on that Tuesday morning, Lisa will be gone. No goodbyes, no phone calls, no trace. Just the silence left behind when a life vanishes. This is the story of the girl who walked into the shadows of Northbridge and never returned. This is the story of Lisa Jane Brown. Before Lisa became a headline, she was just a young woman trying to hold a fragile life together. Born in January 1979, Lisa grew up in a large West Australian family. Several siblings, a small rented home, and a constant movement between the suburbs. Her brothers John and Les would later describe her as the gentle one, the soft heart, the sister who laughed easily and protected the younger ones. She was small with bright eyes and a half smile that made her look like she was always on the edge of a joke. Those who knew her said she had a quiet humour and an ability to see light where others only saw struggle. But life wasn't kind to Lisa, not consistently. By the age of 19, she was already navigating adulthood alone, a single mother of two young children, trying to survive in a system that offered very little support and even fewer options. She lived in a small Maylands unit, cluttered with kids' toys and mismatched furniture. Money was tight, bills were relentless, and the pressure of being so young with so much responsibility weighed heavily on her. People around her speak of a girl who loved fiercely, a mother who gave everything she had, even when that wasn't much. She had dreams like anyone does, dreams of stability, of a job that didn't leave bruises on her heart, of raising her children in a safer environment than the one she'd been given. But dreams can feel far away when reality is demanding, immediate, and unforgiving. Unable to find steady employment and desperate to keep her children clothed and fed, Lisa began working in the sex industry. Not as a choice born of empowerment or freedom, but of necessity. Perth's underground sex work scene in the late 1990s was deeply unregulated, hidden, and dangerous. It was a world policed more by reputation and rumour than by actual safety measures. And for someone like Lisa, who was young, vulnerable, and financially cornered, it was a world that always took more than it gave. Yet, despite everything, Lisa kept going, kept trying, kept surviving. Her life was stitched from fragile threads, but she held onto them tightly, for her children and for herself. And then, just as she was clawing her way through the chaos, November came, bringing with it a series of events that would collapse her world completely. 8 days before Lisa vanished, she was attacked. It happened on the night of November 2nd, 1998, in the busy, chaotic streets of Northbridge, a place where secrets blend with neon, where trouble walks the pavement like a regular local. It was a targeted assault, not random, not impulsive, but planned. At the centre of it all was a man named David John White. White, known in Perth's escort circles as Willie, had a reputation. He was a one-time escort agency owner, loud, brash, and known for moving through the industry with the swagger of someone who believed himself untouchable. He rented properties across the city, he dealt with cash, he lived in the shadows between legality and exploitation. According to prosecutors, White believed Lisa had stolen from him a leather wallet filled with $2,700 in cash. And in his world, theft wasn't met with police reports. It was met with punishment. Prosecutors would later allege that White hired 2 women, fellow sex workers, to track Lisa down and fix the problem. The women carried out the order. They found Lisa and they beat her badly. It was violent, frightening, and deeply personal. But Lisa didn't go to the hospital. She didn't report it because women like Lisa rarely could. In the 90s, reporting an assault meant exposing your work, risking judgment, risking losing your children, and risking retaliation. She confided in someone she knew that she was terrified, that she felt unsafe, that she feared he might come after her again. Then came the trial. In 1999, after she had been missing for some time, White was charged with organising the assault. He denied everything. The magistrate ultimately ruled the evidence as unreliable and contradictory. The 2 women who carried out the assault were convicted. White walked free. Outside court, he said a line that would haunt the case for decades. "I coughed to what I was guilty for, but I was not guilty of this one." He smirked as he said it, according to journalists who were there at the time. Despite the acquittal, White remained a person of interest in Lisa's disappearance. Police interviewed him for a total of 17 hours. He was later charged with unrelated offences, driving without a licence, providing false names, cultivating cannabis, and received a suspended sentence. But he was never charged with Lisa's murder. And he died around 2013, taking his secrets with him. Yet the shadow of that assault hangs over every part of this investigation, because 8 days after it, Lisa Brown vanished, and nothing about it felt like coincidence. Monday, November 9th, 1998. The night was sticky with heat. A late spring storm had rolled through earlier, leaving the streets damp and glistening beneath streetlights. Lisa was in Northbridge, a place she knew intimately, a place that could be both a source of income and a source of danger, depending on the night. Later CCTV footage would surface from a Perth service station. Grainy, blurred around the edges, but clear enough to show Lisa at around 10 p.m. Her hair pulled back, wearing dark clothes, her expression weary, the kind of tired that comes from more than just a long day. She buys cigarettes, she leaves, she walks out into the night. Hours pass, then the final sighting. 12:30 a.m., Tuesday, 10th of November, 1998. Seen walking west on Brisbane Street, turning toward Lake Street. A quiet area at that time, some streetlights were out, shop fronts shuttered, bars closing. No witnesses saw her being approached. No one heard a scream. No neighbours reported unusual noise. She simply stepped into a patch of Perth darkness and was never seen again. By midday, her children were still being minded by a relative. It wasn't like her not to come home. It wasn't like her not to check in. Her family reported her missing. Police at first treated it as low urgency. Lifestyle factors, the early reports said, a phrase far too often used in the 90s to justify delayed action in cases involving sex workers, young mothers, or those struggling financially. But Lisa didn't pack a bag. She didn't withdraw money. She didn't make a call. She didn't disappear by choice. Something or someone stopped her from coming home. When Lisa's family reported her missing on November 10th, every minute already felt like a lifetime. They knew her patterns, they knew her habits, they knew she wouldn't leave her children. They knew something had gone terribly wrong. But the police response in the early hours reflected the era. It was 1998, a time when missing person protocols were inconsistent, especially for vulnerable adults. The assumptions baked into the systems were outdated and unfair. That transient lifestyles led to voluntary disappearing acts. That young women living hard lives might simply reappear. That sex workers often turned up after a few days. Those assumptions cost critical time. Lisa's file wasn't immediately treated as suspicious. Officers made brief inquiries and noted the usual line, possible voluntary absence due to lifestyle factors. It was a damning phrase, a quiet dismissal, one that followed countless missing women of the 90s and early 2000s. Her family, though, wouldn't accept that. John and Les returned to Northbridge themselves. They walked the streets Lisa had walked, stuck her photo up in corner stores and spoke to other sex workers, bartenders and late-night regulars. They asked whether anyone had seen her, alone in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Some people remembered her, most didn't. One or two spoke in hushed tones about the world Lisa had been navigating, a world where silence was a currency and fear kept mouths closed. The family returned to police again and again. They insisted this was not a woman who had run away. For Lisa, her children were everything. She would not abandon them, not willingly. Eventually, detectives began to recognize that the timeline just didn't add up. Lisa had vanished suddenly, without preparation, without explanation, and from an area where disappearances of young women were often early signs of foul play. Within days, the missing person file escalated from routine check to suspected homicide. But the delay, those first crucial 24 to 48 hours, had already allowed evidence, memories, and witnesses to disperse like smoke. It became one of those cases where the clock and the truth were never on the same page. As detectives looked deeper into Lisa's life in the days prior to her disappearance, one name kept resurfacing: David John White. To understand the suspicion around White, you have to understand the world he operated in. White wasn't just a man in the shadows. He was, according to countless accounts, one of the men who created the shadows. A one-time escort agency owner, White was a well-known figure in Perth's underground sex industry. He rented homes under various names, he worked with cash, he forged connections through fear and control, and he was known for a temper that simmered beneath the surface. People who knew him described him as unpredictable. Charm one moment, intimidation the next. Police knew him well. Women working in the industry knew to either avoid him or stay on his good side. So when Lisa vanished just 8 days after being beaten by women allegedly hired by White, detectives couldn't ignore the pattern. Even if the court had dismissed the case, the logic was undeniable. A violent assault, a frightened young woman, and then she disappears? The more detectives dug, the more White's behaviour raised red flags. He had motive. Whether the wallet was stolen or not, White believed Lisa had cost him money, a significant amount in his world. He had opportunity. He was active around Northbridge, he lived within reach, he knew the late night streets. He had history. Not just with Lisa, but with other vulnerable women. He had a car, a white 1972 Jaguar Coupe, an unusual, noticeable vehicle, and that car would become a key point of suspicion. During the original investigation, police received information that a white vintage Jaguar had been seen the night Lisa disappeared, specifically near Lake Street, around the time she was last spotted. Witnesses described it as older style, white, long bonnet, slightly noisy engine. It matched White's Jaguar almost perfectly. When asked, White acknowledged driving such a vehicle. He said he and his girlfriend at the time had even given DNA samples voluntarily. He maintained he had nothing to hide. But detectives weren't convinced. Not then, not years later, not even during the cold case review, 20 years on. The Jaguar kept appearing in police theories like a ghost that refused to leave. Because if Lisa had gotten into a car, willingly or otherwise, this was the car she might have entered. But the problem, as always, was evidence. Nobody came forward to confirm seeing her enter it. Nobody admitted being there, and no one confessed. And the Jaguar was long gone by the time the new forensic techniques became available. Still, when investigators looked at suspects, White and his car never truly left the list. While White was beyond the most publicly discussed person of interest, he wasn't the only one police scrutinised. Lisa moved through complex social circles. Late-night industries attract transient relationships, clients, acquaintances, colleagues, people who spent only minutes in each other's lives. Because of this, her disappearance opened several investigative paths. The two women that assaulted her. Though they were convicted of the earlier assault, they denied any involvement in her disappearance. Police interviewed them both again years later during the cold case review. They maintained their innocence. Their stories were consistent. There was no evidence linking them to November 10. But their connection to White gave detectives reason to keep them on file as part of the broader network surrounding Lisa's final days. The escort agency network. The sex work world of the late 1990s Perth was tightly knit but full of rivalries. It wasn't unusual for conflicts to arise over clients, debts, and territory. Detectives explored the possibility that someone else, another worker, a jealous competitor, or another agency had reason to harm Lisa. Many people were interviewed, most denied knowing her, others claimed vague memories. Some didn't want to speak at all. None of those leads produced actionable evidence, but they expanded the investigative map. Unknown clients. Lisa reportedly had a few regulars but also took on casual clients. Police were able to trace some of them, others had given false names, burner numbers, or no details at all. The reality of sex work in the 90s was that most encounters left no paper trail, which meant the pool of potential suspects was broad and difficult to track. Police believed she may have met someone that night, someone familiar even, someone she trusted enough to approach a car or walk with. But without witnesses or CCTV in the right places, those theories stayed theories. Several months into the investigation, detectives received a tip suggesting Lisa's body had been dumped in a secluded bushland area in Northbridge. It's about 13 kilometres away from Northbridge, in a dense, swampy terrain known for flooding during winter. It was more than just idle rumour. Multiple independent sources pointed to the same region. Some claimed they'd heard men boasting, others suggested they'd seen suspicious digging, and a few spoke about a body left out there, though none could provide specifics. Detective Ron Feynman took it seriously, more seriously than any other lead at the time, because even rumours, when repeated by unrelated people, can sometimes indicate a truth buried beneath fear or guilt. The Lockridge clue became one of the biggest investigative threads of Lisa's case, large enough to warrant an entire dedicated search effort. But just as police were preparing, another unexpected twist appeared in Lisa's file, and it came from a completely different direction. Years later, during the cold case review, detectives revisiting Lisa's disappearance stumbled upon a disturbing overlap. While sifting through old witness statements, they found references to a man connected to a different missing woman, Rebecca de Lalande. A woman whose suspected murder was being reviewed at the exact same time. The crossover wasn't definite, but it was enough to intrigue investigators. Similar timeline, social circles, types of men involved, and patterns of silence. There was no evidence linking the cases firmly together though, but cold case investigators know that predators often target the same types of victims. Vulnerable, isolated young women whose disappearances don't spark immediate media storms. Detectives kept this crossover in mind, examining whether Lisa's case might be part of a broader pattern of exploitation and violence in the underground networks of Perth in the late 90s. No official statements were ever made about a link, but the fact that her case resurfaced during another investigation says enough. Lisa's disappearance didn't happen in a vacuum. Something darker was at play. Something bigger than just one man, one night, or one assault. By early 1999, the case had gone from a missing person report to something darker. Something the police no longer tried to soften with language like voluntary absence. Lisa was classified as a suspected homicide. And the biggest break in the investigation, or what police hoped would be the break, came from a cluster of strange but consistent tips pointing detectives towards a dense bushland area in Lockridge, northeast of Perth. On maps, Lockridge bushland looks plain enough. A patchwork of trees, wetlands and scrub between Morley Drive East, Benara Road and West Swan Road. But on foot it's something else entirely. A place where land dips unpredictably, where the ground turns to soft wet earth without warning, where tall reeds can hide anything or anyone. It's the kind of place that can swallow secrets effortlessly. Several independent sources, some anonymous, some known to police, claimed that a body had been left out there around the time Lisa disappeared. None could say exactly where though. None could give coordinates or specifics, but the fact that separate people whispered the same fear gave detectives reason to act. Detective Ron Feynman organised one of the largest coordinated search operations Perth had ever seen for a single missing person case at the time. More than 100 police officers and SES volunteers assembled at the edge of the bushland in February 1999. Old photographs and archive footage shows lines of uniformed officers spaced 5 metres apart, moving in slow synchronization, pushing aside thick reeds with gloved hands. Others waded through swampy water, testing depths with long poles. SES volunteers crawled through tight, thorny spaces that humans rarely entered. They found items of clothing, damp, torn, tangled in the scrub. For a moment, hope surged. Could these be Lisa's? But forensic testing later confirmed that they belonged to someone else. Still, the tip-off had been compelling enough that the search continued for days. Drone technology didn't exist back then. There were no heat sensors capable of detecting disturbed earth. No DNA stations on site. It was hands, eyes, and human instinct in a landscape designed to confuse all three. Feynman spoke to journalists at the time, saying, "We searched the area 3 times. I'm determined one way or another to solve this matter." His voice in those old interviews carries the strain of someone carrying a personal burden. The footage shows him standing on uneven ground beneath the pale sky, the wind lifting the corners of the police tape. You can see the frustration etched into his expression. The fear of going home empty-handed, the fear of telling Lisa's family that the land had offered them nothing. Years later, he would say the same thing again. Even now, after all this time, it haunts me. He meant Lockridge, he meant the silence, he meant the possibility that Lisa had been there, right there, but the ground refused to reveal her. Detectives believe Lisa's body could have been moved. Every investigator knows that perpetrators often choose remote, low-traffic areas where discovery is unlikely. Lockridge fits that pattern. It was the sort of place someone in the underworld might choose back then. Secluded, sprawling, confusing, dark, and easy to access late at night without being noticed. But it was also the sort of place where nature reclaims quickly its evidence. A shallow grave becomes invisible after one good rainfall. Clothing deteriorates, animals disturb ground, time erases. Detectives returned to Lockridge multiple times across the years, long after the original tip. They used updated methods, consulted new experts, and tried to overlay old maps with new environmental data. Nothing. The land kept its secrets, and for Detective Feynman it became something like a scar. Not because it held answers, but because it might have held the answer at one time. That kind of uncertainty stays with a detective forever. 2 decades passed. Lisa's name lingered on missing persons registers. Her family aged. Northbridge changed. The world moved on. But Lisa remained frozen in 1998. Then came 2019. The Cold Case Serious Crime Squad launched a large-scale initiative to revisit WA's most haunting unsolved disappearances. They called it Operation Emerald, a name chosen to symbolise hope shining through stone. Lisa Brown's file was one of the first to be reopened. New information had surfaced about a property on Carr Street in West Perth, a modest home with a narrow backyard rented in the late 90s by none other than David Willie White. In 1998, that area of West Perth was a patchwork of old homes, warehouses and transient renters. Today it's modern apartments and manicured gardens, but back then it was kind of a place where secrets could be buried, literally. Police believed the property required a full forensic excavation, not a casual inspection, not a scan, a dig. When forensic tents went up in April 2019, Perth took notice. News crews lined the narrow street, neighbours gathered at their fences, some whispering to reporters, others simply watching in silence as if the digging might unravel memories long buried. Inside the police tent, forensic anthropologists, soil scientists and crime scene techs worked meticulously. They removed layers of earth in grids, searching for anomalies, bones, fibres, metal, disturbed soil. Over several days, they dug deep trenches and tested samples. To the public, it looked promising, dramatic even. To Lisa's family, it felt like the first real movement in years. But despite the scale of the excavation, despite the renewed hope, nothing was found. No bones, no trace, no evidence. It was another moment of devastation for Lisa's family. The familiar cycle of hope igniting, only to collapse under the weight of silence. Detective Inspector Lisa Britton from the Special Crime Division said afterward, "We still believe someone in the community knows what happened to Lisa." There was more truth in that sentence than anyone realised. It meant detectives had reason to believe that silence was not due to ignorance, but fear. The Carr Street dig did more than generate headlines. It reminded Perth of a girl who vanished from its streets decades earlier. A girl whose story had faded from public memory but had never faded from the minds of her family. It also reminded detectives of the case that had slipped through their fingers like sand. For Lisa's brothers, John and Les, the dig was a moment of cruel duality, hope and heartbreak in equal measure. Hope because police were still searching, and heartbreak because they still didn't find her. This is the kind of emotional limbo only families of the missing truly understand. It is grief without a grave, love without closure, and memory without peace. One of the most frustrating realities of cold cases is what happens when a person of interest dies. Leads collapse, evidence becomes stale, witnesses lose the courage to speak, thinking the danger is gone, forgetting that some truths have consequences, even when the suspect no longer walks the earth. When David John White died around 2013, detectives faced a paradox. Relief that a potentially violent man was no longer a threat. Regret that they would never interrogate him again. And fear that he took everything he knew with him. White had been questioned extensively in 1999. 17 hours, multiple sessions and multiple detectives. He denied involvement, repeatedly, confidently, almost casually. But White had a way of using certainty as a weapon. Investigators privately believed that if White had harmed Lisa, he would never confess. Not in life, not even in the face of evidence. He was a man who saw vulnerability as a weakness, a trait to exploit and not protect. Detectives spoke to his former associates, men who drifted in and out of Perth's underworld at the time. During Operation Emerald, some of these men were re-interviewed. They gave fragments of stories, suggestions of threats, comments made in anger, snippets of rumour. But none of it was enough. Not in court, not even in the court of public suspicion. White's death meant one thing. The strongest thread in Lisa's case had snapped, and police were left trying to stitch together a story without its central character. If there is one truth about cases like Lisa, it is this. When a person disappears, the family doesn't. They remain, living half-lives defined by unanswered questions. For her family, the years since 1998 have moved in slow motion. Every birthday, every Christmas, every anniversary of that November night. Each year brings the same ache. No updates, no explanations, no remains to bury. They still speak about Lisa in the present tense, not because they believe she's alive, because speaking in the past tense feels like they're abandoning her. Her niece Melinda grew up with Lisa's picture displayed in her home, a reminder of an aunt she barely knew, yet grieved for deeply. Melinda once said, It feels like a story without an ending, like someone paused the final chapter and never pressed play again. And for decades, that has been their reality. As Perth modernised, the world around them changed, but their grief remained the same, shape that it was in 1998. They held press conferences, stood beside detectives, appeared on evening news segments, answered phone calls from reporters every time the case resurfaced. But each time the cycle was the same: a spark of hope, a wave of public sympathy, and then nothing. Silence. Always silence. The kind of silence that is heavier than any truth. Lisa's mother passed away without knowing what happened to her daughter. Her brothers fear they may face the same fate. And her children, now adults, carry that pain of a life shaped by absence. The truth isn't just missing, it's buried beneath 27 years of grief, rumours, fear, and silence. And yet the family still believes. They believe someone knows, someone saw something, and they believe that silence is a choice, not a mystery. They believe Lisa is still waiting to be brought home. To understand Lisa's disappearance, you have to understand the world she lived in. Not just her personal circumstances, but the landscape of Perth in the late 90s. A city with one foot in the past and one stepping clumsily forward. A city buzzing with nightlife and shadows in equal measure. Northbridge was the centre of everything. It was where young people went to celebrate, escape, drink, dance, flirt, sell, buy, hide, or forget. But beneath the neon surface, there was another world, the world Lisa had to navigate to survive. Sex work in the 90s was not decriminalised. It wasn't regulated and it wasn't safe. Women working the streets were exposed to violent clients, manipulative middlemen, dodgy agency operators, and other workers competing for territory. They relied on instinct and streetwise judgment to survive night after night. And in that world, reputation spread fast, but protection was slow. Police often dismissed women in the industry as unreliable witnesses. There was an unspoken belief, harmful, dangerous, that their work somehow made them less deserving of urgency. And that's what happened to Lisa. When she vanished, the early reaction was not outrage, not alarm, not a city rallying behind a missing young mother. It was silence. The kind of silence that comes from stigma, from seeing a woman through the lens of her circumstances rather than her humanity. People forget, or they choose to forget, that Perth has always had an undercurrent about it. A quiet hum beneath the sunshine and beaches. A hum that every major city has, but that polite society pretends not to see. The 90s saw organised prostitution networks, drug suppliers wrapped in secrecy, older men exploiting young women, exploitative agencies, transient populations in hostels, a nightlife district with blind corners and poorly lit streets. It was an environment where someone like Lisa, young, struggling, working late nights, was at daily risk of violence. And these layers of danger weren't abstract for her, they were real. She lived them. A stolen wallet, a man who felt aggrieved, an assault, a threat, and then disappearance. The environment did not cause her death, but it allowed whoever harmed her to get close enough to do it. And to this day, some still believe that her vulnerability is the reason she never came home, and the reason that no one has ever been held responsible. There's a moment of fear in Lisa's story that always sits heavily with me, not because of the exact circumstances of her final night, but because of the world she was living in when she disappeared. A world where young women, especially those carrying more than their fair share of pain, can find themselves pushed towards choices they never imagined making. And I say that with understanding, not judgment. When I think back to my own late teens and early 20s, there was a time where my life felt unsteady too, when money was tight, when support was thin, when I was young and overwhelmed and just trying to breathe through the days. And in that moment of vulnerability, I found myself close to stepping into a world that I never truly wanted. Not because I felt empowered by it, any of it, and not because I didn't understand the risks, but because survival sometimes corners you into decisions you wouldn't normally consider. I didn't end up taking that path, but I remember how easily it felt just to drift towards it. How one conversation, one offer, one moment of desperation can start to feel like an answer. And that's why Lisa's story cuts so deeply, because it reminds me, and many women, of how fragile those lines can be, how quickly circumstances can push you into dangerous spaces, how the world doesn't hold young, struggling women gently, how opportunity and exploitation can look almost identical when viewed through the lens of survival. Lisa didn't choose her vulnerability. She didn't choose to be young and unsupported. She didn't choose to live life in a society quick to judge and slow to help. She was doing what she had to do to keep her children fed, the same way so many women quietly do every day. And it's heartbreaking to consider that that very pressure that pushed her into this world also placed her directly in harm's path. Lisa would be 46 years old today. She would have watched her children grow up. She might have found stable work, moved suburbs, made new friends. She might have even found love. She might have travelled. She might have lived a life with edges softening as the years passed. But her story froze in time, in the early hours of November 10th, 1998. Everything after that is guesswork, theory and shadows. Her brothers still attend police appeals, still stand on the same corners where she walked, still hold the same photograph, the one of her at 19, smiling faintly. Still hope that someone might speak before they can't ask anymore. Her children grew up with that ache of absence. They built their lives around a void. They know who she was, but they'll never know who she could have become. Detective Ron Feynman is older now. He still remembers the Northbridge search. He still remembers every tip he followed, every interview, every empty outcome. He still calls Lisa his white whale, the case he cannot let go of, the one that reminds him that for all the cases solved in a career, the ones that remain unsolved leave the deepest cracks. Even in semi-retirement, he sometimes drives past the old Carr Street house, not because he expects answers, but because questions are the only things left. Lisa's name still appears on missing persons registers, on Facebook posts, on anniversary articles, on posters that fade and have to be replaced. The world she lived in has changed, but the silence around her hasn't. There's a particular kind of cruelty in unsolved cases, the way they sit between grief and hope, the way they refuse to resolve, the way they become stories traded in whispers instead of truths spoken plainly. Someone knows something. Someone always does. But the truth can be an unbearable weight, and some people would rather carry that weight to the grave than speak it aloud. Still, cases like Lisa remind us of something essential. That disappearances don't erase lives. They just hide them. And sometimes the only thing keeping a story alive is the refusal to let silence win. If you have any information about the disappearance of Lisa Jane Brown, last seen walking near Lake Street in the early hours of November 10th, 1998, please contact Crime Stoppers on 1-800-333-000. Maybe you were in Northbridge that night. Maybe you remember a car parked where it shouldn't have been, an argument, a sudden noise, a strange conversation afterwards, or something that unsettled you but didn't make sense at the time. Even a small memory, a detail you've carried quietly for decades, could finally bring her home. Her life mattered, her story matters, and until the truth comes to light, her absence remains a wound across the West. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never forget those who vanished from the West.